let's dive right into it, shall we?
Okay, sure.
Yeah. So let's start with the basic question. So can you introduce yourself for us?
All right. Well, good morning or afternoon. My name is Sarah Holloway. I 51. I moved to the States 20 years ago this year, actually, from obviously from the UK.
Hmm.
Uh, I originally studied at University of Bristol,
Hmm.
so pharmacology at the University of Bristol, and then I did my PhD, obviously, at Cambridge. I got married a couple of years ago. I don't have any kids, which is
Hmm.
relevant, I think, for women in pharmacology discussion. But I do have two stepkids and two nephews that I spoil tremendously. And so, yeah, that's some of the basics.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Um, we will loop around later on in the interview about your own personal life and how you ended up in the US. But for
Right.
now, so what sparked your interest in science? Why did you go into pharmacology as an undergrad?
Yeah, this is a great question, actually, and I had to give some thought to it. My mother claims I remember nothing about my childhood, but one thing
Mm.
I do remember on a Saturday, and I'm going to really date myself here, on a Saturday evening is watching a program called Tomorrow's World
Mhm.
in the UK. I think it started in the 60s. And so basically that was a prime time program which featured science and the latest scientific and technological innovations of the day. And so, I would watch that religiously every week. And the thing, I mean, some of the inventions were crazy and amazing and inspiring. And
Mhm.
the bit I always liked was when it kind of went wrong because it was broadcast live, and so just having to see the presenters kind of tap dance around this whole thing was kind of going south. But so I think so that sparked an interest in science, I think, at an
Mhm.
early age. But actually, I had sort of equal proficiency in both science and the arts, primarily English, and so that one of my first, I guess, the points of decision was when I was having to choose my A levels. And so on one hand, I had my English teacher trying to, get me to continue study English, and I was thinking about a career in journalism, versus my chemistry teacher saying you have to study science. And so I think I was actually quite calculating at an early age because I thought about the future career potential, and I
Mhm.
recognized that maybe there's more money to be made in science than there is in the liberal arts. And then taking that one step further, I recognize that there's this thing called pharmacology, which happened to have this big, profitable drug
Mhm.
industry attached to it. And so maybe I'm going to go there. So I think even at the age of 16, I knew that I wanted to study pharmacology. And then looking at the different places to study, I decided on Bristol because that really had a big focus on central nervous system
Mhm.
pharmacology and the brain, which was just fascinating. So I think that's what. So yeah, it was a pretty early age that I committed to pharmacology, and then initially to Bristol.
Oh yeah. Well, that's pretty interesting. You pointed out you had both aptitude for science and arts, because
Right.
well, from the chats I've had with people in the department, look, quite a lot of people are very multi-talented here in pharmacology.
Right.
Yeah. Have
Yeah,
you?
and I figured I could use that on the
Yes.
side. And actually, in my career, which we'll talk about, the number of times I've been a storyteller, and
Mm.
a storyteller in the context of some scientific concept or whatever, whatever, or future commercial opportunity for scientific discovery. So I've been able to use both skill sets, pretty consistently, sort of throughout my career.
Hmm. And just out of interest, have you done any more arts outside of science at all?
Yeah, so I actually I travel a lot. That's one of my passions outside of
Hmm.
work, and so I wrote a travel blog for about 20 years.
Hmm.
So that sort of exercised the writing. I'm also we're a very musical family, so music is a passion of mine as well. So my husband, he sings and plays.
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm a singer, so there's several creative outlets outside of science that I very much enjoy.
Well, that's good to hear. I used to be a violinist myself, but
Ah,
didn't keep
very
it up for
cool.
university. Yeah, yeah. No, music is great. I love music. Um, yeah. So, moving on from Bristol, how was your
Mhm.
PhD in pharmacology? How would you describe your time? at the department?
Oh, it was fantastic. It was brilliant. I mean, I'm glad I did my looking back, I'm glad I did do my first degree at Bristol first,
Hmm.
because then when I came to Cambridge, I had some broader experience, and then so you could recognize how unique and special the Cambridge experience was because you'd had different experiences
Hmm.
to compare it to. But my experience at Cambridge was terrific, and the context at which I was doing my PhD, so back in 93 to 96,
Hmm.
and I don't know how many people will know this, so there used to be a Glaxo funded sort of mini department within the Department of Pharmacology called the Glaxo Institute of Applied Pharmacology.
Hmm.
And I was the second year of PhD students in that environment. And I think
Hmm.
GAP lasted for about 10 years, I think, in total. And so the reason that was so unique and special was that obviously being funded by Glaxo, you had access to all the resources that working for a well-funded corporate environment would give you access to. So we weren't having to sort of rinse out pipette tips or worry about how we were going to continue to fund the research. But you got to do that in the incredible academic environment of Cambridge. So it really was the best of both worlds. And I was surrounded by just such inspirational people, and also people who are both academics but then industry as well. And so getting that early exposure to how sort of the scientific knowledge could be translated and utilized or applied in an industrial setting
Hmm.
was very insightful for me at such an early stage of my career. Um, so the department was great. Being part of the college was also an amazing experience. I think I was actually the first female president of the Downing College MCR, which was very cool. I also helped rewrite the college's constitution, and so just the opportunities to get involved and start sort of feeling as if you're making a difference that would then be enduring
Hmm.
was really, really cool. So yeah, I had a terrific time.
Oh, that's amazing. Can you just clarify what does MCR stand for?
Middle Combination Room. It's the graduate community. I don't know if it's
Okay.
changed names now, but it was the graduate community. What that was
Yeah.
called back then. I don't know if it's changed now.
Mhm.
So
No, it's just because I didn't attend Cambridge as my undergrad. I was at Warwick University, so it's a bit of a
cool,
mystery for me.
right?
But yeah, that's fascinating that you were with the Glaxo-funded wing of pharmacology. I came
Yeah.
across that when digging into the history a bit. Would you
Hmm.
say that's similar to, for example, the AstraZeneca-funded studentship that we have currently at the department, or is it much
I'm
more like integrated because Glaxo was physically there in the department?
Yeah, I mean, you were physically. I think we were on the third floor of
Hmm.
second or third floor, so we were in there. We would, you go and have a cup of tea, have your tea break, and you're sitting there with your friends who were in academic labs. So there weren't any boundaries. I mean, occasionally they'd wander through your labs and look with envy at all the sort of the nice equipment. Um, but yeah, and I think there was also another thing that I enjoyed. I was one of the founding members of the Department of Pharmacology Ladies Boat Club.
Oh wow.
So that was a lot of fun, and that obviously we had GAP folk, we had department folk,
Hmm.
splashing our way around the cam in November. So yeah, it was, even though there was, I think, the potential for there to be that sort of separation and isolation feeling, in reality, at least for me, that wasn't there at all. I think a lot of that was due to the leadership. Pat Humphrey, Vas Fennock, who were the leaders at the time, really did a great job making sure those barriers weren't there.
Hmm. Well, you'll be glad to know that we've kept up the really like integrated feeling in the department. Everybody really
Yeah,
rates highly how friendly everybody is at
right,
pharmacology these
absolutely.
days. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, do you have a favorite memory of your time here at pharmacology?
I mean, I think actually it was the my short, I'd like to say illustrious rowing career, but it
Hmm.
wasn't really. Really wasn't that good. But that was a lot of fun actually.
Hmm.
So because that was friendships that were forged in work, but then sort of, continued outside of the lab, and on the river. Freezing our butts off doing novice fair burns in November, and then we did that as an 8, and then we did a 4, rode as a 4 for the bumps.
Mhm.
So I think that was kind of the quintessential sort of, Cambridge experiences is, rowing down the river, bumping,
Oh yeah.
wearing the branches. So,
Mhm.
so that was a lot of fun. But just in general, just hanging out in the tea room and just shooting the breeze with your friends. And, it wasn't always easy. You would have periods of time where things weren't going so well. And so just having a supportive network of like-minded and really super smart people to talk with,
Mhm.
that's obviously a highlight as well.
That's good to hear. Did your team ever win the bumps out of curiosity?
No. Well, I was at Downing College, and so
Mhm.
Downing's quite a big rowing college. So Downing, the college, won quite a few times, and one time that I was there, but they were head of the river, and so they did the boat burning on the
Mm,
on
mm.
the in the quad. But no, we were never really going to win much, other than just having fun.
Well, yeah, it's very
I
competitive,
wish I'd
isn't
won a
it?
blade, and I could have a blade sort of up here, but
Oh yeah.
that was never in the cards for me, I'm afraid.
Oh well. Well, there's always the next time, isn't it? Nah. Well,
I think that ship has sailed, I'm afraid.
no worries. Okay. So now touching on the fact that you are recently retired, is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, that's right.
So can you after you complete your PhD, can you give us a flying tour of where you've been after pharmacology?
Yeah. So I've had a number of, I would say, sort of pivotal moments of choice through my career. And one obviously was as I was approaching the end of my PhD, it's like, do I want to stay in research science, or do I want to move out of research science? And I think given the close sort of proximity I'd had to corporate, and to sort of Glaxo, it wasn't that scary to say, okay, I don't think research science is for me. And I was a good scientist, but I was surrounded by such brilliant scientists. It's like
Mhm.
I want to find a place where I can really shine and exceed. And so I knew really bench science wasn't going to be that for me. So then started a process of discovery. And one other thing, and people, I'm not going to go because you can read that on LinkedIn.
Sure.
Um, but I think one of the things that is a founding principle is diversity of experience. And so every time I came to a choice point, it was like, what is the new skill set that I'm going to learn? How does this broaden out my skill set such that I have, excuse me, such that I
Mhm.
have more choice for my next career move? And so my very first move after my PhD was actually working for Rome Planck Rora as part of
Mhm.
what was called then a graduate management scheme. And so the idea of that scheme was that it would be a 3-year, sort of like 3-year engagement where you would spend the first 18 months in the field as a sales rep, and then you come into head office and rotate 3 months
Mhm.
through different departments, which for me at the time, I didn't really know anything. It was like, that sounds a great idea to get exposure and help me figure out what I want to do.
Mhm.
In the end, and this was a useful learning point right at the beginning of my career, the people who started that program actually left about a year after I joined. And so the program kind of folded, which shows you that not everything kind of always works out the way that you think, but
Mhm.
it invariably gives new opportunities. Um, so when it became obvious that that wasn't going to lead to the full promise, I started looking around for other things. And so the choice that I made then was to leverage the most useful parts of my
Mhm.
PhD, which was my analytical skills, and then move that into the commercial setting of a drug company, which was market research, market
Mhm.
analytics. And so that for me was the easy transition that both leveraged the existing skill set, but then built a broader set of experience. And so again, that was kind of a hallmark of the future choices that I made, which were then usually, or the best ones that I loved the most were a blend of the commercial
Mhm.
and the scientific. And so one of the jobs that I loved the most was called market assessment, And I describe that as basically a commercial translator. And so I would be working directly with the scientists and the early clinicians, both to guide discovery efforts for Pfizer R&D.
Mhm.
Should we develop a new drug for ingrowing toenails? Okay, well, let's see, what are the unmet needs of the ingrowing toenail market? What are the current drugs? What would you need to deliver for it to
Mhm.
be a clinically sort of meaningful advance, and also something that payers or the NHS would pay for. And so for that, that was perfect because I could leverage my science brain when I'm talking to the scientists and the early clinicians, but I also needed to leverage and further develop my commercial head, to then put it into the context of patient unmet needs, etc.
Mhm.
So yeah, that was fun. Um, I think the other word I would characterize, again, looking back now, at the choices I'd made, is fearlessness,
Mhm.
because I made some pretty ballsy choices that I didn't know if they were going to work or not. One of them being obviously to move to the States
Mhm.
20 years ago. I didn't know anybody, but I had the opportunity to move with Pfizer, and it's like, sure, why not? Let's give it a go. Um, as well as then after 11 years at Pfizer to leave, the corporate sort of safety of the client side to then work for an advertising agency for 4.5 years. So moving from the client side to the agency side was a big leap. Another one was after 25 years of working um, in the drug industry, is to then go and get experience working in the medical device industry. And I think I really underestimated how different it was. So that was a big learning experience. And then my final career choice was basically taking everything I'd learned. It's a layer cake of experiences.
Mhm.
And the icing on the cake was when I basically became a Bill Nye the Science Guy for Kelly, which is a recruitment and staffing company. And so becoming their scientific expert, which to me was just like, there's no way that you could fulfill that premise, but okay. But basically, providing scientific education to recruiters and sales folks, so that when you're working with clients to help them fill short or long-term staffing needs, you have actually a better understanding of what the position is that you're trying to help recruit for. And so one of my proudest career achievements was instituting the Kelly Academy of Science, which was this just awesome program that I put together in collaboration with dozens of people to really deliver education in foundational aspects of science, so that people would just be able to have better quality of conversations. So I know that was quite a long-winded answer, but my career arc or trajectory is not a linear one,
Mhm.
and it's pretty different, I think, to a lot of my sort of former sort of colleagues and peers, with lots of kind of
Mhm.
movement and zigzagging around, which I think is fab. I love that. So
Oh yeah, I mean it's absolutely fascinating, and I do resonate some of that because I used to work as a research assistant and was
ah,
looking at going into a PhD, but then I moved over
right,
to science comms over here, and now I'm
hmm,
doing a lot more creative work than
right,
usual.
yeah,
And but there's of course there's a strong scientific like through line throughout all of your career choices. So I'd like to
absolutely.
ask, how were you able to keep up on top with the scientific language and the scientific
Mm,
advancements when you've left the bench for so long, as it were?
right. No, great question. And yeah, the layer cake I described of my career, the buttercream icing in the middle, that's always
Hmm.
science. So
Hmm.
that's the glue that's held all these things together. Um, so how I kept current, it depended what field I was in. And so when I was at Pfizer, for example, in my market assessment career, I supported a number of therapeutic areas. And so allergy and respiratory, gastrointestinal, sexual health, et cetera, et
Hmm.
cetera. And so I'd be reading a lot of research papers. And again, would depend on the drug candidate that my efforts were supporting,
Hmm.
or if we were evaluating a new therapeutic category. And so yeah, I'd go back to the scientific literature a lot, and also the clinical literature. Um, in my market analytics career, market research career, I had access to a number of specific analytics databases. So you can see prescription trends, all of that, all of the sort of the nuts and bolts of who's
Mhm.
prescribing, what are they prescribing, that sort of stuff. I also did a lot of primary market research, so both qualitative and quantitative market research. And I did that throughout my career. I would both write discussion guides as well as conduct interviews myself. And so another way of keeping current was through first-hand discussions, whether it was with clinicians, all different types of specialties, primary care physicians, payers, which is particularly obviously big here in the US. That's a whole additional, I mean, we've got NICE and
Oh
in
yeah.
the UK, but in the US here, you've got commercial pay, it's a whole other beast, and I'm not by any means an expert. So that's how I kept current, was both a mixture of literature and then just talking to my
Mhm.
colleagues who were the experts and saying, okay, what's important to you in disease area XYZ
Oh, great,
or Z.
great. So, you've touched on that. You talk to your colleagues quite a bit, and that you've had exposure to more patient-facing,
Oh yeah,
research areas. Have you ever had the
yeah.
chance to talk to the patients themselves, the general public, and how has that
Oh, for
shaped
sure.
how you think?
Absolutely, for sure. So one time, this was when I was still working for Pfizer. We were working on a new drug for, well, it was for fibromyalgia, and which is a
Mm,
disease that's not very well understood. I think people know a little bit more about it now, but and it's this sort of pain condition which basically people just are so fatigued and um, have zero energy, can't get out of bed, everything hurts. And there's a lot of misconception, or a lot of physicians don't believe it exists. They just think it's in your head. And so I was leading the effort to put together the advertising campaign. So actually, this was when I was at Pfizer before I joined the ad agency. Put together the advertising campaign for this new drugs launch in fibromyalgia.
mhm,
So we had the opportunity both to talk to physicians to understand their attitudes towards fibromyalgia, and half of them thought it was made up disease, and half of them recognized that it did have significant impact. But we also did had an event, or did a collaboration with patients, and it was a fibromyalgia patient society.
mhm,
And what we did was we sponsored, or we worked with them to go to Brussels and the European Parliament to petition MEPs to sign a white paper to basically say, we recognize fibromyalgia is a real legitimate condition that is worthy of treatment. And
mhm,
that's a very simple, basic aim of legitimization. And I remember meeting, I think it was the lady who was the head of the French fibromyalgia patient organization.
mhm.
I was, standing there chatting to my PR person, and this woman just came over, and she was like, she's like, thank you, and she just basically burst into tears. She gave me a huge hug, burst into tears, like, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for listening, thank you for supporting this effort. And so, it's experiences like that. You often hear drug companies' slogans like, "The patient is at the forefront of everything we do," blah blah blah. And sometimes you think they're just paying lip service, but if you're actually in those roles and you're having those interactions with patients, it's not lip service. It really does drive everything that you do.
Mhm,
And another job that I had when I worked for Shire
mhm,
was as I had a lot of interaction with patients um, uh, who have von Willebrand disease, which is another disease that a lot of people haven't heard of. Everybody's heard of hemophilia.
mhm,
Nobody's heard of VWD, which is another bleeding disorder, and it's a bleeding disorder that impacts women. And so these women, obviously every month you have a menstrual period, and these
mhm,
women were bleeding. And it was just, and so there's that double stigma, right? It's like bleeding, and then it's like,
mhm,
ooh, icky women period bleeding. And so some of the patients that I met, and I was involved in putting together patient websites, doing some patient testimonials, they had just appalling stories. Like there was this woman who was, I think, in her early 20s, and her physician was just deeply unsympathetic and said, well, just have a hysterectomy. It's just like, and there were treatments available, but so yeah, I've had the privilege to be in positions that really have a meaningful impact on patients' lives. So it really does drive everything that you do.
Yeah, it's a really humanizing situation to be in, isn't it? To realize,
It's
yeah.
humbling, it's humanizing, it's distressing times. Sometimes you do interviews with physicians, and especially the specialists, and you think you have no idea about it. Sometimes it's a little shocking and disheartening
Mm,
that physicians who are supposed to be experts, they really should know better.
yeah,
But people are
yeah.
human, I
Well,
suppose.
goes to show that how important positions like yours were, right? Yeah.
Well, yeah, we think so. There's certainly a role to play.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Sure. So, would you say that that the thing you love most about your career is that you're able to have such an impact on these patients, or uh, what about
Yeah, I mean
something
that's
else?
the ultimate expression. Is There was one clinician who once said to me, and he was a scientist clinician, and he said,
Hmm.
for us as scientists in the lab, or sorry, clinicians in the sort of the early lab, the applause is when the drug gets to the market and actually gets into the hands of physicians and is then sort of used by patients. And um, so everybody has a different metric of what success looks like to them.
Hmm.
I think definitely some of the positions or some of the jobs that I was in had a much closer proximity to the patient, so you didn't have to look very far
Hmm.
to really feel like you were having an impact or see the value of your day-to-day efforts. I think some of my other positions maybe perhaps a little sort of further back. I've worked across this full spectrum of drug development,
Hmm.
which is one of the things I've enjoyed, from being a research scientist to being, a global marketer, like launching new products. And I've worked in every kind of step of the drug development process in between. So sometimes when you're in phase one, and it's just like, oh, this is probably not going to make it. But every failure, as it were, there's a learning from that, and then
Hmm.
the next one, okay, well, let's address it, blah blah blah. So,
Hmm.
so I think sometimes the payoff can feel a little further away, but as long as you have that vision, that goal clearly in mind, that's what you're aiming for, and there's many ways to get there, and everybody who's involved in drug development understands that more often than not, your drug will,
Hmm.
keel over before it makes the finish line, which is just part and parcel of how it
Yeah,
works.
that's the reality of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, your career really does have a strong like theme of communication, right? And talking to people. Is that something like one of the things you really enjoyed about your overall career?
Yeah, I think so. That's a good observation. I think as I'm a storyteller, and so I love to weave and to tell stories, and whether that's through, and I think you have to be articulate when you're trying to connect groups that
Hmm.
are coming from different places, and so sort of being that translator to, I'm a scientist over here, and immersed in my mechanism. Okay, well, okay, let's just take a step out and just say, okay, if you're developing a new drug for hypertension, let's look at the PK of the molecule that you're working on. Does it have the relevant character? Does it have the characteristics it would
Hmm.
need to be,
Hmm.
successful in the market? Because if you're going to have to take it 3 times a day, that's not even. If you have to take it twice a day, no go. So I think it's being able to recognize and empathize in the different situations. What's important to that individual? Help them see the perspective over here, and then I'm the commercial person over here. I don't want the science person just to lob this this drug over the wall when it gets to phase 2B and then expect me to try and make it a blockbuster. And so I think that's how I've utilized sort of my communication skills, is being able to bridge, like bridge towards a common understanding,
Hmm.
which is not always easy, and especially sometimes the commercial realities of needing to launch drugs in today's market can sometimes seem just annoying. I'm not sure the right word to explain it, but just there's the puristic and beautiful science, but then it's like, how can you not appreciate how beautiful and gorgeous this science is? It's like, well, I do, but this payer over here won't pay for that. And so that's sometimes a tricky message to communicate. And I've had experiences where it's been a difficult conversation.
Mhm, mm. Must have been difficult, right? You
Yes.
yes. You did mention you were a global, I forgot the exact term you used, but you were
Global
working in
marketing.
global marketing. Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Did you also face this sort of issue when marketing to different regions in the world? And if you did, how
Right.
did you overcome that?
Yeah. So my position, my role in global, and it's, maybe different in different companies, but at least the
Sure.
company that I was in. So we were a global marketing team that would then interact with our colleagues in Europe or our colleagues in Asia, or wherever it was in the world. And um, so again, you're communicating with colleagues that would have different needs in the local
Hmm.
markets, but at the global level. So, for example, if you're in phase 2A and you were having to make decisions in terms of clinical endpoints, or which countries to run your clinical studies in, you had to take into account the needs of the different markets, the needs of the different payers, for
Hmm.
example. Um, and you're not going to be able to satisfy everybody. And so again, the point there was to make sure you understood, talk with everybody, make sure you understood their needs, make sure they understood what the overall global strategy was, and have opportunity to input into it. But at the end of the day, you still had to make decisions that were like, well, sorry, you know, Australia over here, but we're going to have to do this, which I know doesn't immediately address your need, but then maybe down the line we'll be able to fold something else in that does. So yeah, it was again same kind of principle of
Hmm.
good lines of communication, and transparency in terms of what you were able to accommodate versus what you weren't.
Hmm.
And quite often, the biggest markets, you had to address the needs of the US. You had to think about like France, and France is a really tough market for reimbursement. You have to show significant levels of differentiation and uniqueness, for the French payers to pay.
Hmm.
Obviously, the UK, there's sort of thresholds of cost effectiveness. So it was your job to be as aware as possible, but also to make sure you lent into your local colleagues who had more expertise than you. So I think it was, you had to temper temper yourself with a heavy dose of humility as well, and like, I don't know everything, so you tell me, and then let's work together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, this sounds, this was a global marketer and your roles in general does sound quite, how should I say that? High pressure. Did you have a team you could lean on, or were you mostly on your own in this?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, you're always surrounded by a team of people, whether or not that team of people report into you, or whether you're part of a team that the sort of indirect reporting, or you're leading. Uh, you're having to lead through influence, and
Hmm.
so for most of my career, I didn't have direct reports, and so I was in cross-functional teams. I was the commercial.
Hmm.
So, for example, when I was at Pfizer, develop in a they were called early candidate management teams, and so this is where you've got a compound that's come out of the lab and is
Hmm.
in early stages of clinical studies. And so you've got really important decisions to make to shape that molecule into a future drug asset. And more often than not, I was the only woman in a room full of, like older guys. And so, which was totally fine. But I've lost my thread now. Where was I?
We were talking about whether you had a team to lean on in these positions that
Oh,
you
thank
had.
you. Yes, sorry.
No worries.
Senior moment. Um, uh, so yeah, so in that situation, I didn't have any direct. None of these people reported into me, but I was one member of a very important cross-functional team. We all had our roles to play,
Hmm.
and so for that, you're communicating your perspective, and again, working very closely. I'd work very closely with the clinicians, in particular around the structure of the clinical studies, making sure the endpoints were right, et cetera, et cetera. So for that, you had to, you led through the persuasiveness or not of your arguments. And, you would make your arguments, and sometimes they go, yep, makes sense. And sometimes they go, nope, not buying that, try again. And so, you'd potentially go back and sort of try another way, or meet somewhere in the middle. So it was like that for most of my career, to be honest. I was in those kinds of sort of positions where I was leading through influence and not because I had a team of people reporting into me. Later on in my career, I did have some direct reports who were awesome and just, again, sort of phenomenal individuals. I found it super stressful. I know everybody's like, oh, you've got to be a team. It's like, I actually found it really stressful. And I had great people working for me. And I found it stressful because, I want to make sure I'm doing the very best I can for my people. So I think I preferred actually leading in cross-functional teams. But yeah, there was, it was stressful at times. There was a lot of, a lot of pressure. And there's the inherent pressure of, is this drug going to work or not? But yeah, you manage through it, and you're never doing it alone in a vacuum. You've always got a team of people around you that you can rely on
Oh
for
yeah.
support.
Yeah. Well, we do our best when we have a good team with us, isn't that right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
that was one thing I learned very early on in my career, and it was a key difference between how I operated as a PhD scientist and how I needed to operate in my first job. And so, as a PhD scientist, I'm there doing my autoradiography studies, doing my binding studies, doing these insanely frustrating electrophysiology studies, and it's all about individual excellence and just doing it by yourself, even though you've got some people around you. You're the one doing the experiment. My first job for Rowan Planck Raw, as I said, was as a sales rep, and so I was applying the same mentality when I was doing that first job. In that, like, right, I'm gonna see these physicians. And so basically what I was doing was, this was when I was still writing up my PhD,
Mhm.
was going around and talking to physicians and chemists to, it's like, here's our drug, blah, blah, blah. And so I set about that job the same way as I set about my PhD. It's like, right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to get into these. Blah, blah, blah. And I distinctly remember my first performance review with my boss. First time I'd ever have a proper performance review and a proper job. And I sat down and I was like, yeah, I'm, kicking ass. I'm doing really well. And he said, Sarah, he says, I know that you can be successful. It's like, yeah. He says, but think how much more successful you would be if you use the power of your team. And it was just like, whoa. It was like giant penny just sort of dropped to my head, because we were a team of 3. Each territory had a team of 3. And my other two territory colleagues were incredibly seasoned reps. And they were very successful. And I just hadn't thought about sort of leveraging or using them in a positive way to, for them to help me, but also for me to help them. So that was a real eye opener. Right at an early stage, is like, yeah, individual excellence is great and necessary, but you are part of a team, and just think about how you can offer your strengths to the team, and vice versa. So that was one sort of memorable moment in my career that I think sort of really helped shape my approach, my future approach.
Yeah, that's amazing. But so this aspect of teamwork. Um,
Mm.
Actually, let me start from the top with that thought. Actually,
We can talk
I
a bit
lost the
out.
first one. Yeah, but throughout all these high pressure environments, this
Mm.
drive to succeed, you had. Well, I see that you've also had the time to uplift women in science and pharmacology. Um,
Right.
can you give us a brief overview of what you've done in that regard?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the ways that sort of I got involved and to do that was to get involved with the Healthcare Businesswomen's Association,
Hmm.
which again is very important in my industry, and it's a key organ. It was founded in the 60s. I can't remember, but anyway, I got involved fairly soon after I moved to New York,
Hmm.
and was elected onto the board of the HBA chapter in the New York metro area. And so that's one of the biggest chapters of the HBA, which is both US and now international. There's international chapters as well. So if
Hmm.
you haven't heard of it, Go look it up.
I will.
So got involved there, and what my role was as director of programming, and so basically putting together events and programs to for members to come and either listen to sort of career advice programming, or some sort of advances in science, or whatever
Mhm.
it was. But it kind of I'm sort of fairly sociable person, and so it was great because it was a way for people to come learn and network, as well as then sort of raise money for the chapter as well. So I did that both in New York, and then when I moved to San Francisco, I was the director at large for programming in San Francisco as well. So,
Mhm.
so I think I was involved the HBA pretty intensely for about 15 years. I got involved a little bit when I moved to Chicago, but not quite so much. So that I think was one way to sort of to give back, and that's I would absolutely encourage people to look for societies like that. There's other ones like Women in Bio.
Mhm.
I'm not sure if there are if which ones are in the UK. So I know the US ones, but look for opportunities like that, and it's never too early to get involved, and just talk to people. I mean, I think that's the thing is I've always been willing and happy to talk to anybody about my career journey, because I know it's a question I've been asked a lot. It's like, how
Mhm.
did you transition from being in the lab to being in a corporate environment? And so it's like, sure, here's what my path was. So I think the advice would be get involved, look for societies that align with either your areas of expertise or interest, or where you potentially want to go, and then just talk to people. Most people love talking about themselves. I mean, we've been going for ages, and I'm loving
Oh
it.
yeah.
So most people will love to talk to you and be it's like be humble, but don't think about it. Think about it more. Think about it as much as what you can give to the conversation as opposed to what you can get. Some of the
Mhm.
least successful people I've seen through networking, I hate the term networking because it sounds so calculated, um, but it really is important. Just talk to people and sort of understand where they're coming from. Seek first to understand, like learn from them, and
Mhm.
then see if there's something that you can offer to that conversation as well. So yeah, and so build that village and build it early and often. Even if you don't know if that person's going to be useful to
Mhm.
you, talk to them anyway. Because one of the other worst things is if you introduce yourself to somebody and you can see the mental calculation. Oh, okay, this person isn't going to be useful, and then they kind of just like look for an excuse to wander off and
Mhm.
exit from the maybe that's just me, but you just never know. And one of I've had the pleasure of working for some awesome like female bosses, and one
Mhm.
of them, she would say, always be open to it's always worth a conversation,
Oh
because
yeah.
you never know where the next opportunity is going to come from. And
Mhm.
actually, and a couple of my jobs have come totally from left field because of a conversation. So don't ever be afraid just to have a conversation.
Mhm.
At the least, you'll learn something, and at the most, it might, give you a different perspective or unlock an opportunity you hadn't thought about. So I
Mhm.
don't know if
Yeah.
did that answer your question, Daniel? I know that was long and
Uh,
rambling.
no, I mean it was a fascinating insight on how you've been networking and how you've been involved in these business and women bio associations. Um, but yeah, I just wanted to touch on whether a lot of your your uh, uplift and these women in STEM sort of initiatives, did that come from your participation in these associations outside of your workplace?
Um, yeah, I mean, are you asking how did I get involved in these to start with?
Um, sorry. Let me just clarify that a bit. Um, did you do a lot of your support and outreach and uplifting activities within these associations, or did you also do that
Yeah.
as part of your corporate roles?
So both actually. So I mean, I did do a lot of stuff within the context of the HBA,
Hmm.
but I was also asked on a few occasions to mentor people.
Hmm.
Just through just through my job, or being in the position that I was, especially as you get sort of more senior, people are naturally interested. Okay, well, how did you reach the position that you're in currently? And would you mind sort of chatting to person XYZ about that? So yeah, it was both HBA, but also, I was
Mhm.
always happy to have a conversation, and I still am. So if anybody wants to chat with me individually, you're welcome. Just
Oh,
hit me up on
absolutely.
LinkedIn. Um, but yeah, I think it's, again, because I've had the benefit of that sort of mentorship, and just critical conversations at key decision points in my career.
Mm,
And I think it's only when you look back on them you realize how important or pivotal they actually were. And so being open to having those conversations with people, I think you never know what that's going to lead to for them. And so that's, I think, something I've always you know tried to hold myself open to have those to be accessible, and
mm.
if anybody needs advice, solicited or otherwise.
Oh, sure. So, just to confirm, you'll be happy for just me to put a little thing on the website saying that you're happy for people to contact you for
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm
advice. Okay,
more than happy. Yeah, yeah.
good to
And I
hear.
think the thing, as you get older, your network grows as well. And so, if yeah, again, like, depending on what you're interested, or the sort of field of the industry that you're interested, I've probably got connections in that. But so it's then sort of connecting people. So I love to connect people to other people as well.
Mhm, mhm,
And I'm okay at it. There are certain ones of my colleague who are outstanding at it, and
mm,
it really makes a big difference. And so, when you're younger, people say you've got to network, and it's just like, oh God, I really don't want to. It sounds such a drag. You really, really should. Just don't
mm,
think of it as networking. Just think of it as having an interest in people,
yeah,
being curious, and just chatting to people. So don't assign a big label of networking.
mm,
Just talk to people, because the more people you talk to, it makes it more fun as well. You meet so many cool people from different walks of life.
mm,
So really, I wish I'd done it more. I wish I'd been a bit more considered and thoughtful about it earlier on in my career. Um, but I got there eventually, and somebody else said, "Never eat lunch alone." It's like, what the
mm,
hell do you mean by that? That's just. But when the last couple of jobs I had, it's like, okay, then I'm going to make a concerted effort to schedule lunch with different people, and it
mm,
was brilliant. So okay, maybe schedule a couple lunches a couple of times a week, but
mm,
it really will make a big difference. And the more you do it, the easier it will get.
mm. So, would you say that's your your highlight advice for early career women scientists to just talk to people and to,
Mm.
do your best to keep an ear open for conversations?
Yeah, I think so. And don't be afraid to take risks,
Mm,
and so, because there's no right or wrong way to do your career.
mm,
Like, everybody's career, and it's so fascinating because I keep up with a lot of my peers on LinkedIn, and some of them are chief scientific officers, some CEOs of this, and it's just like, whoa, there's a lot of C-suite in my
mm,
my peer network. And my career path isn't like that at all, but I wouldn't swap it for anything. So I think, be fearless, and don't be afraid to take risks, knowing that sometimes they might not pay out, but that always is that's always a learning
mm,
opportunity. And so, it might not go exactly the way you intended it, but
mm,
if you're thoughtful about the choices that you make, and again, one of my primary things was always, okay, think about not this immediate job that I'm applying for, but the one after. It's like, how will what I learn in this job that I'm applying for help me get the next one?
mm,
Because in that way, at least for me, I didn't feel boxed in. And I know that doesn't work for everybody, because some jobs require specialization. But for
mm,
me, I wanted to continue to diversify,
mm,
which would give me the maximum flexibility to make
mhm,
whatever choice I wanted to make for the next one. But yeah, talk to people. Just yeah, don't be afraid to strike up a conversation
mm,
with somebody you don't know. If you go to a networking event, I used to teach networking as part of a little course at
mm,
Kelly, because it doesn't come naturally sometimes, and it can be a bit intimidating. And so if you go online, there's a ton of resources, like, here's some questions, some openers for networking, so
mm,
that you don't feel like such an idiot when you go in. It's like, I don't know anybody. Have a few questions in your back pocket, and then work that room. So
mm. Well, that's great. It's fearlessness, bravery, and forward thinking. I think that's an amazing summary of your advice. Yeah. So now let's just take a step back and just talk about you
Okay,
personally, as with a couple of cool down questions, shall we?
let's
Uh,
do that.
so other than science and socializing, what is the most important
Mm.
thing in your life?
Oh, this is going to sound a little hackneyed or whatever. Or it's family.
Of
It's my family,
course.
family, friends, my relationships. I think that's what the pandemic at least taught me is I think it taught all of us is like what is it that you really value? What's really important to you? And in this
Mm,
stage of my life, especially as you get older, not to get a bit morbid, but you start seeing people, you know, passing away, and you
mm,
think, holy cow. And so it's family, it's friends, it's relationships. And there was interestingly, it was I think it was a few years ago. There was a study by Harvard,
mm,
which I don't know if you know it. It was about what is the predictor of happiness, the
mm,
greatest predictor of happiness. So if you look at people who are the most happy, what is it in their lives that make them happy? And it wasn't status or money or you wealth, whatever it was,
mm.
but it was the quality of love in their lives. And so I'm very fortunate, I met and married the love of my life. And so right now, my priority is to spend time with with my husband, with my family, with my friends.
Mm.
I'm also in my giving back era. So in my Taylor Swift, in my giving back era. So I volunteer. I volunteer as actually at the Field Museum
Mm.
in Chicago. So if any of you guys ever want to, or in Chicago and want to come visit the Field Museum, um, then let me know, and I volunteer there, so I can get you in for free.
Oh,
I
great.
also volunteer for a food pantry. So right now, it's spending time with the people I love, giving back to the community, and also travel. I'm traveling
Mm.
like a fiend, and so those are the things that I'm choosing to spend my time on after having the luxury of being able to retire.
Oh, great. You've got quite a well-rounded life now in your retirement.
Great life.
Um,
I love my life.
yeah. So, in terms of relaxation, do you like to
Mm.
relax with your family? Do you like to practice your singing? Since you mentioned that before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, at home, I love to cook. I'm a foodie. I
Mm-hmm.
love to bake. So I went to the King Arthur School of Baking in
Mm,
Vermont about a year ago. I did a artisan baking class. So I love to bake, and love to cook.
mm,
Obviously, music is a big part of our lives. So we're usually practicing for some show or other.
mm,
And then active relaxation, as I said, is travel. So my New Year's resolution this year was to travel, was to be going somewhere every month this year.
mm-hmm.
So with the exception of January, I'm on track to do that this year. So yeah, it's I've got lots of things to
Oh,
occupy my time, and yeah, have a great time.
oh, great. Where are you heading off to in March?
March is Patagonia. So 2 weeks
Oh, wow.
hiking in Patagonia. So that'll be, I went about 15, 20 years ago.
Mm.
So it's going to be interesting to see how much harder hiking is now than it was when I was in my 30s. So we'll see. I'll let you know how I
Okay.
get on.
Well, fingers crossed. I'm sure you enjoy it. So, we're coming to the last handful of questions we have.
Yep.
Um, so this one's so we've got a question here about what female scientist do you most admire? Do you have a
Hmm.
particular name you'd like to drop?
Well, I mean, it's difficult to think of contemporary scientists
Mm-hmm.
right now and not think of Charpentier and Duda, right?
Mm, of
For their
course.
work on CRISPR. I mean, clearly that is amazing with the potential to sort of, to revolutionize sort of disease, notwithstanding all of the technical issues, blah, blah, blah.
Mm,
But then I was thinking, okay, well, what about some of the historical, some of the OG women of science, and sort of I was thinking of like the Marie Curies and blah, blah, blah. But then it's like, that feels a little intellectually lazy because they're the
mm,
ones that immediately popped to mind. So I was actually I did a quick search and ended up reading about this woman called Sophia Louisa Jex Blake, which is a bit of a
mm,
mouthful. She was an badass. She was in the mid 1800s, and basically she
Hmm.
fought for the right to learn and to practice medicine in Edinburgh. And so the barriers that she had to overcome, both legally but also physically. There was a riot when they were. It was just, I was reading her story, and it's like,
Hmm.
wow, this woman is amazing. And she fought through it, and so she did become, she did become one of the first practicing physicians. She was the first woman who was admitted into the University of Edinburgh. I mean, and so just her tenacity and
Hmm.
resilience was incredibly inspiring. So I think sort of women like that, who aren't the names that you immediately think of, um, yeah, she just blew me away. I was reading about her a
Hmm.
couple of days ago. It's like, good grief, well
Yeah.
done.
Funnily enough, I'm heading up to Edinburgh in March, so I'll do a bit
Oh,
of reading
right.
on Sophia and see if I can spot anything related to her there.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
Apparently, there's a plaque.
absolutely.
There's a plaque somewhere in the University of Edinburgh now that, and because they were called, there were seven women who were,
Hmm.
so the Edinburgh Seven they're called, and they only actually they got their honorary degrees in 2019, which is
But
150
yeah,
years after they matriculated. So that's just isn't it's insane.
yeah, it is. And finally,
Hmm.
well, how would you like to be remembered?
Uh, okay. I think professionally, I'd like to be remembered as a builder and a creator. I
Hmm.
love things, building and creating, whether that's teams, whether that's things like the Kelly Academy of Science, um, you know, things in a slightly better place than before I was there. So, um, so looking back and seeing where you've been,
Hmm.
I think sort of personally, it's like, be remembered as a kind, generous person who, I don't know, who
Hmm.
was fun to work with
Hmm.
and extremely smart.
Oh, absolutely,
But
right.
anyway, but no, seriously, I mean, yeah, you just, it's nice to feel as if you've had or are having an impact
Mm.
on people's lives, however that manifests. So um, I think that's how I'd like to be remembered.
Yes, it was a tough question, but
Yeah, tough
yeah,
question.
that is an excellent answer. You've done quite a lot over the course of your career, and yeah, it's been amazing to talk to you, Sarah.
Oh, thank
Um,
you.
yeah, so those questions are done now. There's just a few like small admin things I'd like to ask you, if that's all
Oh,
right.
sure. Yeah, no
Yeah.
problems.
You said you did you write down answers to these questions before we started, or because you
I
mentioned you
did,
were
yes.
yeah. If you could send that to me, just oh wow,
I
great.
can send you a picture. I don't
Yeah,
know if
just
you're going
send
to be
me a
able to read
picture.
my scribbles, but yes.
Oh, I have practiced reading handwriting. No
Okay.
worries. Yeah, just yeah, if you could send that to me, just so I can
Yeah,
just
sure.
annotate my notes. Thank you
Oh,
so
sure.
much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um. So also, you are a great speaker, and it's been
Oh,
a pleasure
thank you.
speaking to you. So I'm also organizing my department's away day. I don't know if this was
Hmm.
running when you were there, but usually we have an external speaker to come give a talk on career,
Mm-hmm.
science, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we're in the process of maybe scouting out a few people. Do you do these sorts of uh, events at all? As it like an external speaker?
I have in the past.
Hmm.
Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to consider it.
Sure. Sure, yeah. I'll forward your name to the EDI committee because they're always very keen on getting this sort of representation at the away
Okay.
day. Yeah.
Well, one
Um,
thing you didn't capture, sorry, Daniel, is
sure.
because you had a question actually twice on your list about whether I faced any hurdles as a woman in science.
Oh
And
yes.
actually, yeah, I mean, and I've been asked this multiple times over my career whether I faced hurdles as a woman in science. And the honest answer has to be not really.
Mm,
Um, and I don't know. And I answer that as a woman who didn't have kids and so didn't have to juggle that additional responsibility to my career.
hmm.
But So I don't know whether it's because I was just very fortunate or the folk that I worked with, but I always felt that my perspective was valued, and I never felt that my gender got in the way of anything. So it was neither a help nor a hindrance.
Mm,
I was there as the commercial representative, most of the time, or the strategic planner, or as blah blah blah. So I think I was always seen more as that functional expert rather than a female and then a
mm,
functional
mm,
expert. So, but I know that may not be representative of everyone's experience. But I think it's important for people to hear that you're not always going to run into
mm,
blatant sort of sexism and discrimination
mm.
because you're a woman. So I just wanted to sort of give you that answer
Of
to the
course.
question because we didn't cover it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. No, yeah, we were skipping around the question list a lot, but no, it's important for us to get a range of different perspectives in this interview series. So I do appreciate you
Yeah.
coming back to that one.
Okay. No worries.
Yeah. So what I'll do once I've prepared and posted this story, this interview even, which might take a while because we have a few others queued up before
Sure.
release. I can give you a link to the interview and the video so you can have a
Okay.
look yourself. Of course,
Oh, sure. I'll send it to my mum as well. She'll be like, "Oh, I'm so proud of you."
of course, of course. Feel free, feel free.
My mother
Yeah.
will be like,
But yeah, I'd like to say thank you so much. It's been amazing talking to you, and I really
"Oh,
appreciated
thank
it.
you."
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
been a lot of fun. So thank you for making it such a comfortable interview as well, Daniel.
Of course.
It's been very very pleasant way to spend an hour.
Oh, absolutely.